Oh, that's fun. All right. So where'd you all grow up?
Well, my earliest memories of when we grew up was I was probably 3 or 4,
Okay.
and about that time we moved from further East Texas in Pine Forest to Brashear, which
Okay.
was further west. Wyatt was 6 years older than me. My oldest brother, RS, had already left home, and my sister was 13 years older than me. So, but my memories of Wyatt, he was 6 years older, so he was enough older than me to, I really looked up to him, and he had a mind to. He had a way of thinking of things that were fun. When we grew up, we made our own fun. We didn't have a lot of games and toys, and we had some, but Wyatt was always adventuresome. And so my little brother, Ivan, who was 2.5 years younger than me, we always kind of looked up to Wyatt. And sometimes it was fun, and sometimes he played tricks on us.
That's where Mom got it.
Yeah. So that's just various things that I remember about him. He had a friend that, by then he was probably a teenager. Well, I remember things younger than that, but I remember when Ivan and I were still pretty small, but we had to work in the fields. I remember picking cotton. On my 8th birthday, I picked 200 pounds of cotton, which is unbelievable. And so we had a lot of fun in the cotton patch. We'd be out there all day long, and there was a stinging nettle called a bull nettle that would, come up sometimes in the fields, and they hurt if you got in them. And of course, we always went barefooted. And I remember, I think it was White, but I don't know for sure, that covered a bull nettle with sand, but we could still step on it, which was not fun. And we'd get in little cotton bowl fights before the cotton bowl opens. Cotton opens, out. It's a hard bowl. We'd have cotton bowl fights, and Daddy would come and he'd find all these bowls on the ground, so we were in trouble. But I remember one of the major things I do remember about him. We always, when we'd pick a bale of cotton, the wagon was full, ready to go to the gin, he'd pull it up to the yard. And we'd sit out there at night, even though we'd pick cotton all day, we'd sit out up on that bale of hay. Cotton. And just, it was just fun. And White would tell us, Ivan and I, stories. And it was always real, back even before that, they used to have mad dogs, dogs that had to have, what do you call it, they were mad.
Okay.
And they kind of roamed. And
almost like rabid?
Rabid. And so people in the country would call people down the road and say there is a mad dog, and they usually follow a road. So anyway, I had never seen one, I'd never, but I'd heard my parents and others talk about them, so it was a fear. Well, Wyatt would tell us these real scary stories, and we'd be about, quite a ways from the house, and he'd get right to the point where it was just really serious, and he'd jump down out of the wagon and run home, and then of course Ivan and I would just frantically get off of the bale of cotton and try to follow him, and he'd say, "What's that dog? What's that dog?" Our little feet probably just touched the ground here and there.
Yeah, 2 or 3 times to get back into it.
He and a friend, when they were older, put a trolley wire. They climbed up a tall tree. They put steps up a tree, and took a big cable and fastened it way up in the tree, and ran it down to a tree further out. And they had a long spring. It was like a spring. It came out of a wagon. It was about this long and big, and that was what they put the cable through.
Mm-hmm.
So when we jumped out of the tree, all we had was just to hold on, and we'd put a rag around it to keep our hands from getting hot.
Right.
And we'd jump out of that tree and hit the ground with our feet. And he was always creative like that. He'd just think of things to do. And to us, it was just fun. So we were always climbing trees. I know one time he made stilts, and he put the foot part. Ivan and I had to climb a tree to get only.
the stilts?
I mean, they were way up high. And we walked all over our pastures on these stilts. I mean, what kept us from breaking legs? I don't know.
That's funny.
But we did that. I remember we used to have corncob fights, and we would get up in the barn loft and run and see how far out we could jump out of a barn loft.
Right.
It's a wonder it hadn't broken our legs or arms. We would have rubber gun fights. He was enough older that he could do things better than we could. So he would take a piece of wood and frame out this gun, and he'd put clothespins. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before, but he would make a little gun where you stretched a piece of rubber.
Band, and you snap
And
it.
yeah, and man, it hurt. Well, he could always make a better one than Ivan and I, so we got the worst end of that. I remember he used to dig a hole in the ground and put wood in it, to fix a fire. And then Daddy always had corrugated metal, like on the roof, laying around. So he would put a piece of this corrugated metal across it, and we always had fresh peanuts, freshly pulled. We always had peanuts.
But you can cook them on there?
That's what I was going to say. He would shell these peanuts and put them in those little corrugated. Well, no, I'll back up. We would take, by this time, the corn in the fields was dry, and we would take one of the outside shucks that was solid, and in this shuck, he would put peanuts, and then we always had ribbon cane syrup.
Yeah.
So, and Mother used to make a candy out of it in the house, but he created this in the yard. And so he would put these peanuts and this syrup in this little shuck, take a stick, stir it around, and of course Ivan and I were trying to do the same thing, and it never worked out. But he would his always turned out just right. It would kind of set up a little bit. It would make it chewy. It finally cooked down. He'd cook it down until it kind of got chewy.
That's funny.
And I don't remember if he put anything, and Mother would put soda in it and make it foam up. But anyway, I don't remember that. I just remember him always having the better candy than Ivan and I.
And so is the sugar caramelized with the peanuts?
Yeah,
so
it's good. It's really
a peanut candy
and
made on a shingle.
No, it's not a
Corrugated
shingle.
metal, though, right?
Corrugated tin, we call it, corrugated tin. And he could always get his fires burning better than Ivan and I. It was just always, he was just a little better than everything Ivan and I tried to do. Let's see what else he did.
And he was the next above you, right? So
he was 6 years
6 years,
older.
but there's no one in between.
No, well, there was one, but he had gotten killed when he was 18 months old.
What was the story there?
He was 3 years younger than White and 3 years older than me. And they had a barn back behind the house, and that road went right by the side of their house. And a neighbor of Daddy's had brought his team of 2 horses to hitch onto Daddy's wagon. Well, Rowan was, by this time, she was about 8, and White was about 3, or maybe a little older, because Billy Pat was 18 months. Mm-hmm. Mother had nursed him and dressed him, and they were outside playing right by the side of the house, and she had just put Billy Pat out there to play with them. And this team of horses ran away, no one driving it, came flying down this road and ran over Billy Pat and killed him. And my mother said that following year, she had no memory of that following year. It was just so she was just so grief-stricken. So I never knew him, of course, because he was older than me. Yeah. And I never asked my sister Rowan, and of course White probably couldn't remember it, but she was enough older that I think she would have remembered it, but I never did ask her that.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was older. He was between us. But another things that we used to do, we'd go down in the woods, just White and Ivan and I, and we'd go down there and build a bonfire and cook, or not a bonfire, but build a fire, and White would cook something over it. We just always had something going. But he would, I remember one time he had cut a grapevine that would go across a creek, and, we'd hold on to him and swing across. And White was going to go across it, and it broke right in the middle, and he fell in the creek. Of course, scared Ivan and I to death. We just knew he was going to fall in a snake or drown. And he and Ivan and I would climb these little thin trees, and I don't remember, they would call them saplings. I don't remember what kind of tree, but anyway, as we got higher, it would pull us over, and White would hold on to the tree and then let go, and we'd just be going like this, holding on to this tree.
Oh, funny.
So he was just always creative of something entertaining.
What did you all do on the farm? What was the farm? What did it produce?
Cotton and corn, and we worked in the fields from spring till fall.
Okay.
We would sometimes in the summertime, the cotton would be ready to pick right when school was supposed to start. So they would start school and let us go for a month, and then we'd be out for a month to work in the fields, which made that first month almost useless. As far as learning.
Yeah.
White was always ahead of us picking cotton, he was just far enough ahead of us that we always we looked up to White.
Mm.
He could always, he was real sweet to us, but he wouldn't tolerate if Ivan and I got in a fight. He put a stop to it.
Really?
I can remember he didn't. So, I have all just good memories of White.
Well, that's
I'm
great.
just looking up to him, admiring him. And as he grew up, and even after he and Fred married, I always admired what they did because it was the same type of thing that I enjoyed.
Right.
Their way of life, their living up in the mountains, and we always had so much fun going and visiting with them and going up and camping in the mountains.
Yeah.
I have many, many happy memories of campouts and our kids all playing together and growing up together.
Oh, that's great.
So, do you have questions? I can't think right offhand of.
Yeah, I've got some I'll keep firing. The kids, so my mom and her siblings always mention how he was an effective disciplinarian, but it wasn't like a mean one.
Right.
He was always like...
He was firm but kind.
Firm but kind.
Yes.
And one of the things they would say is, he told you once, it wasn't a big deal. By the time he told you the second time, though, that's
and
the
my
end
dad
of
was
it.
the same way. You didn't want him to tell you the second time.
Right.
But White was kinder than my dad. Had a different personality.
What was your dad like?
Male chauvinist.
Okay.
He was of the age that the man ruled the roost, and there were things about my dad that were not real good. Or before my time, then I've heard stories. But then he was a good daddy. He loved us. He loved our kids. Sometimes he was not as kind to my mother as I wanted him to be.
Mm-hmm.
But they lived together 50 plus years.
Yeah.
And
And what about your mom? People talk a lot about your mom.
my mom was a sweet, tender-hearted, kind, typically wonderful mother.
Yeah.
She worked hard all her life. She was second to the oldest of, oh goodness, I don't know, 5 or 6. I don't remember exactly how many got up to count them up. She just was she was a Bible. She loved the Bible, loved to study the Bible. And Daddy at one point was the elder of the congregation where we went when I was growing up.
Yeah.
When I was coming up. But Daddy was one that, what he said, that was it.
Yeah.
He didn't mince words, but he could get out in the yard when we'd go down there, and especially as our kids grew up. He loved to play croquet. He loved to go fishing. They had a big pool out in the yard. He'd had it dug. They were building a highway on Interstate 30.
Okay.
Right in front of our house. And so the companies that were doing it, the contractors, would dig a pond for the farmer, which was good, for the dirt, so that they could use the dirt on the highway. So they dug 2 different ponds for Daddy, one across the highway and one next to the house. And Daddy stocked it with fish. So we used to love to sit, and he fed them. So I caught a fish on a cane pole one time, and the fish would just fit in one of those big wash tubs.
Right. Big.
So, but we get out there in that yard, and he was real good at playing croquet. And
That's where we get it from. Croquet is a big one in our family.
yeah, we love playing croquet. Another thing about our growing up years, which there's only one, we always had something fun for Christmas, but we didn't have a lot. And one of the things Daddy would always do would be buy one of those big peppermint, you know, they were this tall and this big around, peppermint. And he'd have that under the tree, and we didn't have a lot of fruit. I mean, it was kind of a treat.
Right.
And it would always have a bowl with a lot of fruit on it, which we loved. And he'd always have black cat firecrackers with black cat and Roman candles and sparklers. Okay. Those were as much the fun of Christmas as gifts. But the only Christmas that I really remember what every one of us got, Daddy must have had a good crop that year. Rowene, the oldest one, got a cedar chest.
Wow.
Wyatt got a bicycle. It was the only bicycle the family ever had. He rode it, and then Larry and I, Wyatt rode it. Wyatt got it, then Ivan and I rode it. You know, it went down the line. Ivan got a tricycle, and I got a little green table with chairs and a little lamp, little all-burning lamp. Uh-huh. So that's the one Christmas. I remember getting dolls and other things, but that one sticks out in my mind. But that bicycle went through the family. Uh-huh. I remember the little town of Brashear was about 2 miles, I guess.
And RS was already gone by that point.
Yeah,
right?
RS was. He was at one point he was driving a truck. I know it had cold drinks. He was working for some Coca-Cola company or something, and he would come out to the farm, and it would just thrill us to death because we get free cold drinks.
Yeah.
So my memories of him was always seeing him where he was working, or he'd come to see us.
Right.
But he never. I don't remember him ever just living at home.
Right.
Rowene stayed home longer than the others. Anybody else did. Mm-hmm. There was something else I wanted to. You had asked me something. Go ahead and ask me a question.
Yeah. And actually, if it's all right, can I switch?
All right. So RS was the oldest. Rowene, second.
Nick.
Yep.
Now they were like 2 years apart.
Right. So they were close.
And so.
So when RS left, what did he leave? At what age do you think?
He was probably 18.
Okay. And how much older is he than you?
15 years. Rowene is 13 years older. And then there was a skip between Rowene and Ivan, Wyatt for 6 years.
Oh, wow.
And then there was Billy Pat was 3 years younger than Wyatt, and then me, and then Ivan, and we're about 2.5 years apart.
Do you know where you all grew up? Does that farm still exist? Does it have an address you remember? Or?
The address in Brashear, I don't remember it was a route.
Okay.
But it was just Brashear. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we moved from deeper East Texas, Pine Forest, in that area, I was 4, and I remember us moving. I remember a few things before we moved, just little incidents. But I remember when I was about 4 years old when we moved to a rent house up between Cumbia and Brashear, which is still in Hopkins County, which is all of this happens in Hopkins County. We rented a house, and of course back then, you can nearly always, if you rented a house, you always had to fight bed bugs. The people before you depended on who lived there before. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we'd have to do in the mornings when we'd make the bed, Mother would have us go and look in the ticking of the mattresses, because that's where we'd find them. And we'd have to, get them out, and that was just a little thing. And we'd get rid of them. But it was just a thing that you kind of knew you were going to have to do when you moved sometimes into some of these rent houses.
Right.
And an old couple across the highway from us had land for rent. So Daddy rented quite a big acreage for this old couple. Their name was Tom and Tommy Baker.
Oh, wow.
Real sweet couple. I had no children, so they just really doted on all of us. So Daddy bought this land for $35 an acre. Okay. I remember that.
Wow.
And there was like 90 acres on one side of the highway, and I can't remember how much on the other, but it was about 200 acres total. And so he farmed on both sides, and he had cattle. Most of the cattle, well, not all of them either, but he had cattle, horses. Not we didn't raise horses except work horses, and Daddy first just used a horse for the fields, and then he got a tractor. First tractor we got. Now this is more of my life, I guess, than White's, but
I think it overlaps.
yeah. But I remember Daddy's first tractor had metal. It was, I guess, it might have been during the war.
Mhm.
I remember when World War II broke out, and I was still pretty small. Mother would, when we'd come in from the fields for lunch, Mother would always have the radio on, and uh, the commentator was something here. What was his name? Walter. Anyway, he was always had the new news, and war had broke out, and it was just such a frightening thing that I mean, I was 10 or 12 maybe, and it just I could picked up the fear from all the adults. You know, it was a very scary time,
Right.
and
And you were 9 when it broke out,
I guess I
or
was
1939. So,
yeah, I was born in 30.
Yep.
So
About
yeah,
9.
yeah, I couldn't remember exactly.
And Grandpa
So-
Wyatt would have been 15.
15. So RS was the first one to go
And he
into
went
service.
to service.
And he was in, I know he was in Africa. I don't remember where all. But he wasn't directly in the fighting. He was, I don't remember what he did. But he used to send little things home to us, you know, that he bought I'm trying to think where can't think of the name of the area,
Mhm.
but it was I think on the Mediterranean Sea. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
And at one time he sent me a little bottle of sand from the Sahara Desert.
Wow.
I don't know what happened to it, but there were some other little things that he sent us that were made by the African people, and we'd get letters from him, and it was a fearful time. And then White tried to get into the Air Force, but he wanted to be a pilot, but he gets airsick, and he never did make it as a pilot. So he was real disappointed in that. I remember he was in North Carolina or South Carolina stationed at one point, and Rowene took a bus, I guess, and went out there to see him
Mhm.
while he was in the service.
Do you know if he ever deployed overseas, or did he stay on the stateside?
No, White never was.
Okay.
RS was, but no, I don't think White ever. And then Ivan was in the service, but his was what would have been Korean. He's
Right.
2 years younger than me.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was in the service, but I don't think he ever went overseas.
Can you tell me about the farm that you grew up on just a little bit more? Was it pretty green? Did you have water near you? Rivers?
We had creeks,
Okay.
and the creeks were fun. We used to enjoy. Mother would fix us a little lunch, and we would just be gone maybe half a day, and she just didn't worry about us. But when we hadn't had a lot of rain, we'd wade in the little places in the creek, you know, where there was water, catch crawfish.
Yeah.
I don't know how we kept from getting snake bit, but we just always had fun climbing trees, swinging across the creek on a grapevine, playing in the water, catching crawfish. I remember catching Daddy liked to fish, and they would seine the little pools and get crawfish and little minnows, and that was always fun to watch them. One time we had, and Daddy of the highway, I mean the land across Interstate 30, which was 67 at that time, Highway 67. He had a friend. Well, no, White and all of us. Ivan and I's job was to sit on. He had 2 big sawhorses, and they'd cut down this tree, and Ivan and I would sit on the log to hold it steady while they used this long crosscut saw that it took 2 of them, you know, to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so one time they were doing that, and they cut a tree down, and it was kind of hollow, and there was some baby fox in it. Well, they caught those baby fox, and we made I guess White was the one that made the pen for these little fox. And one of them, he kind of tamed, and he would let it out of the cage, and it would follow it around like a little dog.
way.
And we just thought that was the neatest thing. But boy, if you put food in there to them, the wild came out. Oh man. So I remember when the little fox got too big for us to be able to keep. Daddy and some other men around like they fox hunt or coon hunt. They'd hunt. They called them coon hunters. In fact, we had a neighbor named Cooney,
Yeah.
and they took those little fox down into the woods and let them loose, and then they let the dogs, try to find them. I don't remember if they ever shot any of them or not, but I just remember it really upset us little ones because we didn't want the little fox to get killed.
Those are your babies at that point.
But anyway, that was kind of an interesting time. But I just remember seeing that one little fox following White around. But
And
yeah.
Grandpa found horses throughout his life as well, but he always grew up with horses.
Well, we had work horses,
Right.
but there was a neighbor that had a horse named Smokey, who was a cutting horse in a rodeo.
Oh.
And Smokey, Mr. Schroeds, Cooney Schroeds rode him, and he was called a cutting. You know what a cutting horse
Yeah.
is. So they were going to move to. They lived right next to down the road from us, and by this time Smokey had retired from his rodeo days, and was really more a pet. So when they moved, they asked Daddy if we could just take Smokey. So all we used Smokey for was to ride him, and. So it was White, I believe, that was coming. I think it was White. It was White or Ivan, and I can't remember for sure which. Fran may remember. Got Smokey and saddled him and was taken out across the pasture. Well, he had pastures with gates between them, and he'd let the cattle graze in one. And then, so anyway, he had closed the gate from this one big pasture to the other one. But White didn't, or Ivan, whichever one, I can't remember for sure. I don't know for sure which one I did, but I've kind of forgotten. Whichever one it was riding this horse, just full speed. And the horse saw the gate, I guess, before he did. And boy, he just stopped. And they just went right over the horse.
Wow.
It's a wonder it doesn't. It's 1,000 wonders we hadn't gotten hurt a lot. But we all had to work in the fields. When the corn and cotton was planted, that was the two major things. Daddy sometimes would raise oats, and that was another fun thing. Was they had a big old harvester that a neighbor Daddy had to hire this all done, and they'd have this big harvester come and just park out in the field. And then they'd take wagons, and farmer neighbors would help one another with this. And so they would I remember doing this myself, shocking the oats. You would gather a bunch of them and stack them up, and then take another handful and wrap around them and kind of make them look like a teepee that would, am I being too active?
No, it's great.
And so we would shock these oats, and then they'd come along with a wagon and pitchforks, and they'd take these shocks and throw them in the wagon, and then take it over to the thresher. It was a thresher. And they would run it through and take the grain off and make a great big haystack out of the straw, and then to catch the grain. And that was just so exciting for that harvester to come to the fields and for us to be able to watch it. It was just something different. And but when they planted the cotton and the corn, we had to thin. We called it thinning of the cotton and corn. Daddy had us. We would have to, your hoe the hoe part of the hoe is about this wide, and that was about how far apart he wanted his stalks to be. He they'd thin them. They'd plant them with a planter and drop a lot of seed, but you didn't want them all growing because they wouldn't reach maturity or not. So we had to go along, and also to keep the grass out of it. Right. So from early spring, we would thin the cotton and thin the corn and try to keep the weeds out of it until it was almost time. The terminology was they would lay it aside, meaning, okay, it's to the point now that we're just going to let it mature. And then we'd have to start gathering corn, and Daddy he had a tractor. Well, we did it sometimes with horses pulling the wagon, but after we got a tractor, and that's how I learned to drive, is driving a tractor.
Tractor? That's pretty common down there, wasn't it?
But anyway, Ivan and I always had to go. They would go down a row, and of course the row that was as wide as the wagon, it would be like two rows maybe, and the wagon was going to knock those rows over. Ivan and I were the little ones, so we always got the down row, we called it. We'd have to go pick the corn off the floor, off the ground, which was, and the men, White and his daddy and others, would go along the side gathering the row. And I remember when they did it with horses, they just, the horses would stop while we gathered, and then they'd tell them, without even getting on them, they'd just say, let them, they'd make them go a little further and then make them stop. We'd gather. So we did the corn that way. And Daddy had a bin, certain area in the barn where he put the corn. And rats were terrible in the barn. Of course they would be. And he had another room where he put grain. And so we would have what we called rat killings. We had a little dog that was real good about catching rats. And so all the family would gather together. We had pitchforks and everything we could think of things to hit them with. And we'd go out there and they'd move the hay around and the rats would scatter. And the little dog would catch some of them and I don't know if my kids even know all this. I may want, if I could get a copy of this.
Oh, I will.
And, but that was a big thing, rat killing.
Wow.
These are the kind of things I remember the first light. When we first moved to Brashear, we did live in Pine Forest when we moved to Brashear when I was about 4. Daddy had what was called a wind charger. It's not a windmill. It had a double blade. It was just a double blade. And if the wind blew, he hooked it up to a light and to a radio. If the wind blew, we could hear the radio and have lights. If the wind didn't blow, we didn't. And I remember going from that to a lantern. A Coleman lantern was lamps at first, just lamps, kerosene lamps. And then they came up with these Coleman lights that made it a lot brighter, prettier light. So we went from that. And I remember the first radio we ever had, first car. It's unbelievable in my generation and friends, the difference in today. How many things have been invented or unbelievable. From what I'm telling you right now, which was just,
How big was I'm going to do another pieces. All right. Tell me about your high school or your school. Did you have to get picked up with a bus? Did you
Yeah,
ride
we rode
there?
the bus, and it would always we lived not far off the highway, Highway 67, which is now Interstate 30. So we lived fairly close. Well, at first we lived far enough off that it was a good little walk, and it was kind of bad when it was muddy because I was always worried because there were bridges across creeks in some of the areas that had no sides, no railing, and these buses would slide around, and I was just always so afraid we were going to go in the ditch. But they'd pick us up, and we'd have to go a route around, before we get to school. So, yeah, we rode a bus. And one time when we were older, and this was after White got the bicycle, and White and Ivan and Roy all went to the same school in Cumbie, which was 4 miles the other direction, west of us. And I remember one time I had missed the bus. And, they would come by and honk, and we'd have to be out on the highway. We'd have to leave the house and be out on the highway. Well, I had missed the bus, so White put me on his bicycle and pumped me to school, 4 miles to school. He was always the big brother. And he was real popular in school. And some of my best friends right now at church are children of White's best friend, Gene Rawson, and his wife was Velma Mosley. And I think White may have dated Velma, maybe, but Gene Rawson was his best friend, and I go to church with their daughter.
No kidding.
Yeah. And then I enjoyed school. I can remember when I was little. This is another thing about, I'm going back and forth. I can remember just couldn't wait to learn to read. And I had a few little books. I can remember every one of them real well. But Wyatt, I wanted to read so bad. I would ask Wyatt to read the funny papers to me. And he would. He would read the funny. I just couldn't wait, but he would read the funnies to me. So when I finally got to where I could read, boy, I hadn't stopped. But anyway, he was just always there. But anyway, I remember no, it was Ivan that had a crush on his first grade teacher. We called it primary instead of kindergarten. And she was a beautiful young girl. Ivan really had a crush on her. And I loved her, Miss Branham. And I remember different incidents in my school life that some were real happy and some were not. I had a typing teacher that I just couldn't stand her. So I didn't get real far. I took it 1 year. And I didn't go back the next year.
What'd y'all do for lunches, Jim?
We had a lunchroom. Yeah.
And you packed your own lunches? And...
Yeah. Well, no, we could buy our lunches. I don't remember ever having to take our lunches. Really? I don't think. But I was telling him a while ago in the summertime when the crops cotton was ready to pick and all, we'd go to school. They'd start the school, I think, go ahead and start it in September. And then they would go for 1 month, and then they would be out for a whole month while we were working in the fields, and then go back and start school again, which was kind of a waste.
How many kids were in your school?
I don't remember. Our classes were like 18 or 20 in each class, sort of that size. I remember more than one of my major teachers was my third grade teacher, and she was very much Indian blood. I don't know if she was half, but she had all the features and the dark skin and real dark coarse hair. Sweetest teacher in the world. And I remember things about her that I don't remember about any other teacher. She was big on health and cleanliness. Wow. She would check our fingernails. She would, back then the kids were from the farm. Some of them didn't bathe but once a week. Their ears would be dirty. I mean, that was common. And I had a little friend that had diabetes, and she would give herself shots in her knee or in her thighs. That just always, I graduated from elementary school. No, from grade school. It was grade school and high school. I graduated from grade school as the salutatorian of my class. And I graduated from high school as the valedictorian. And I still have some of my annuals, and I was voted most popular, one year most beautiful. But that wasn't a big deal because there wasn't about 18 in my class. Vicky will brag about that sometimes. I said, Vicky, no big deal. There wasn't that many of us.
It was a 1 in 4 chance.
Yeah. So I remember at the end of the school year, different teachers would do different things for us. I remember one time we went down in the pasture somewhere in the woods, and they had a big old pot and made a big stew. It was like Hopkins County stew out in the woods, and that was just a big treat for us as kids.
Yeah. Oh, that's too cool.
If you don't mind, can we pause and take a second? Just remember as many facts as you do about your parents' full names, if you had any like aunts, uncles, cousins, like just kind of what your surroundings were.
Family history.
Yeah, as many as you can remember, like where you guys lived. You said Pine something, followed by Brashear, Pine Forest, then Brashear.
Yeah.
And then you said Highway 30 became something else. Those kinds of details are so fun for us to be able to kind of dig in on. Yeah. So your parents' full names were?
My daddy was DeWitt Talmadge Trapp. Mother's was Edna May Minter. And they both came from deep East Texas. Mother Minter and her family lived around between Pine Forest and Picton, which was, little communities. My daddy was also from East Texas, but Como. and Picton was kind of where he was from. And I don't know for sure how Mother and Daddy met. I just don't remember. It might have been in church because we went to church in Pine Forest. And mother's, I may be backtracking, but mother's mother and daddy were Robert, and we were talking about this earlier, and I can't remember. A friend remembered, I think, the Daddy Bob's full name, Robert Little Bob Minner, and his wife was Lou Alabama Hayden Minner.
Her name was, what was it?
Hayden was her maiden name.
Wait, no, but what was her first name?
Lou Alabama.
Lou Alabama.
So they called her.
I didn't know that.
They called her Bama, and Daddy Bob was Little Bob. We called Daddy Bob and Mother Minner. Their last name was Minner. There was a lot of family down there. Mother Minner had one sister that was an old maid, and I think she was a school teacher. And
what does old maid mean?
No, never married.
Oh, gotcha.
Just never married. It's called them old maids.
You didn't know.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. But Rowene, she lived closer to where the school was. And Rowene, my older sister, lived with my mother. We called her Auntie. And I don't have very many memories of her. Rowene did because she was older. When I remember her, she
This
was
was
already.
Addie and Maddie.
No, that's a different family.
Oh.
Anyway, Rowene lived with my aunt and went to school one whole term.
Oh.
And Rowene had a lot of tales about things that she did living with my aunt. Anyway, there was, then there she had, Mother Minner had, was Addie, and then Aunt Ella and Aunt Etta were sisters. And I know there were others, but I can't think of right here. I've got it on paper, but I've kind of forgotten who all their names were. That was Mother Minner's family. And Daddy Bob had, I don't even try to remember all their names. I've got this information written down at home. But they lived not far from Pine Forest. And I remember when we'd be down visiting Mother Minner and Daddy Bob, riding in his wagon, and he had the seat was called what was the seat of the wagon called? You may remember this from Westerns. But anyway, we'd sit on those seats, and ride to Brashear on the wagon, to Pine Forest to church. And one of Daddy's half-brother, my daddy's half-brother was a preacher. And and he lived right there in Pine Forest. A lot of my relatives lived there around Pine Forest. And I remember going to church there. And
was most everybody down there Church of Christ, or was there a couple different churches?
Oh, there was several.
Okay.
Yeah. But in my lifetime, my family all grew up in the Church of Christ. But I don't think I think Daddy maybe was, I think Mother's family were mostly Baptist.
Okay.
And I think that she became a Christian after she and Daddy married, if I'm not mistaken. My daddy, like I said, he has told me that at one time he worked in a coal mine there somewhere around Como, which is, again, east of Sulphur Springs. I've got a picture of him doing a trapeze act. He was in a kind of a costume, and he was hanging on the swing by his, just hanging over. And at some point, I don't know if it was a circus, but I've got a picture of him doing that. I think he was pretty wild.
This was your dad, or
yeah, my daddy.
Oh wow!
So, but there was then there was a period of time when they moved to Dallas, and he was a policeman. Granddaddy was a policeman for a little while in Dallas, and their house burned. They had I don't know if it was their kitchen stove or what, but it blew up and caught their house, burned their house. Those are all memories before I was born.
Okay.
But I've just heard them tell those stories.
And then from Dallas, they moved back out?
Moved back down to East Texas.
Wow.
I don't know how long they were that might have been kind of in their early married life.
So that last house the only house I knew they lived in, when did they move there? Did you grow up in that
I
house?
started telling you this, and I'm kind of going to retract. When we first moved from Pine Forest area to Brashear and Cumbie, we rented a house there about 2 miles from Brashear.
Okay.
And across the street was another house that belonged to this Mr. and Miss Barker. And then their house they lived in was further off the highway, up behind this house. So when the people moved, and each step we took was a little upgrade. So when this house became vacant, which was a rent house of Mr. and Miss Baker, we moved from this first house we moved into, where I told him about having to pick bed bugs.
We got that story.
To this house, and we lived there. And Daddy was working what they called havers for Mr. Baker. He didn't he rented this land, and so he would give him. I think it was thirds and fourths. I think it was thirds of either the cotton or the corn and fourth of the other. It was called halving. What do they call it?
Sharecropping.
Sharecropping. So when Mr. and Miss Baker, before they died, and when they got, I think they didn't have children, but they had a nephew that took care of him. He was a professor over at A&M, over Commerce. Daddy was able to buy this property, and I told him he bought that land for $35 an acre. Wow. And so when the Bakers died, we moved into their house, which was from the second house we lived in, which they had a tank by the side of the house, and they had it running into the kitchen and the bathroom. Now, they didn't have hot water, but they did have a bathtub, a little room with just a bathtub. So they let the water from this tank run into the bathtub, and then we'd have to heat our water to bathe. But that was a step above where we were. And then when they decided to build the house that you've seen pictures of down on Highway 67, they had an old shed and a garage over here, a car garage, and then over here was an old shed that at one point when we lived there, they had an old Model A or Model T, an old car, which the nephew took. But we moved out of the house we were living in to this shed, dirt floor. And Mother had to take an old wood stove that she'd cooked with before. And Daddy's half-sister, Aunt Maddie, and her husband, Uncle Walter, came and lived there. They lived in the garage because it had a door. And we lived over here in this, and this was even after, I think, Wayne and I might have even started dating when this was, it was later. But anyway, we lived in this old shed. And can you imagine dirt floors? And I don't know how Mother ever lived. But anyway, and they tore down both of these two houses that belonged to Mr. and Miss Baker. And then Uncle Walter and Daddy built the house down on the highway, closer to the highway. So that was an experience of that time. Living and I look back and I think, I don't know how on earth and Mother, we bathing and washing and cooking on that. But Mother was cooking on a wood stove, I think, when we lived in that second house. So it was, back then, no electricity.
An outhouse.
We didn't get when we moved to, we didn't have actually a bathroom.
Right.
Well, we didn't even have a bathroom in the house that's there now. We have an outhouse toilet. We did have a bathtub, and he pumped water out of the pool so we could bathe in pool water.
Oh my gosh.
And they had a tank that that caught the rainwater.
Yeah.
So that was our water. But that house was right on a gas line, so we had natural gas.
Wow.
Which was a blessing.
How cold did it get there in the winters?
I remember when Daddy would go take an axe to the pool and break the ice so the cattle could drink. And I remember one year, White and one of his buddies, there was rabbits, were just cottontail rabbits, or big old jackrabbits were had the bigger ears, and they were the bigger rabbit. Um, White and his friend hunted rabbits, and they were paid a certain amount. And I think they must have killed like 30 or 40 rabbits during the winter, fall and winter. And it got colder back then, a lot colder there than it does now, because the winters were pretty cold. It wasn't uncommon for us to have ice on our pools at all. Of course, the houses were cold; they weren't insulated. And Wyatt's job was always to get up in the morning and go build the fire in the fireplace.
So where was RS?
RS was away from home by the time I remember.
Really?
Yeah, he's 15 years older than
I
me.
didn't know that.
So by the time I have any memories of him, he was already in Sulphur Springs working. He worked for an ice plant at one time, and I know he drove a cold drink truck, because he would come out to our farm and to see us. And of course, Ivan and I and White thought that was the greatest thing in the world, because we
Get
could
cold
get
drinks.
free cold drinks.
Oh my God, so fun.
And Daddy had a brother. One of Daddy's brothers was Cecil.
Yeah.
He was a full brother. Daddy had Uncle George and Aunt Addie and Aunt Mattie, who were half brother and sister. His mother had married a Maddox, and I'm kind of repeating myself. And when he died, Grandma married Grandpa Trapp. And then they had Daddy and Uncle Cecil and Aunt Gladys and Aunt Golden, Aunt Iva and Aunt Ima. So anyway, the half sister and her husband were the ones that came up and helped Daddy build the house.
Wow. So why did Rowene go to live with your other aunt?
When Rowene, I don't know how to explain Rowene. She was still staying at home. Rowene was in love with a young man when she was, I don't know what age, probably teenage, school age. And Daddy didn't want her dating him, so he wouldn't let her go to bed. And Rowene grieved over that man most of her life. And I remember she was enough older than me that she kind of took me over and kind of helped raise me. I remember sleeping with her. I remember her doing things for me, like curling my hair and doing stuff like that. And I always slept with her. And she would sit up at night doing some kind of handwork, because she always did beautiful handwork. And she'd cry. She'd listen to this real sad country music and cry. So she went to school in Cumbie, and I think she enjoyed it, but I don't remember her dating anybody. But anyway, Aunt Arlo, which was Mother's youngest sister, and her husband, Uncle Vester, he had a government job, and they sent him to Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland. And so they kind of helped Rowene. Rowene was not much younger than Aunt Arlo, in fact, like 4 years. So they took Rowene with them when they moved to Maryland, and they were up there about I don't think it was quite a year. And so when they came back, not long after that, Rowene moved to Dallas. She knew some people there, and they let her live with them, and she found a job. And so that's when she left home.
So there's her late teens when she did that?
I think she was probably in her 20s before she moved to Dallas.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she was.
And did you have other cousins that lived around you in Brashear?
No. For a while, I had this Aunt Arlo and Uncle. He was a school superintendent. Campbell is another town that was, a little further away from Cumbie, where we went to school. And they lived pretty close. And then Mother had another sister that lived in Sulphur Springs. And so we saw those two families quite a bit. And Daddy had a sister living in we had relatives in Sulphur Springs, Daddy's and Mother's. And we saw a lot of them. Now, I don't remember going to see my grandmother and granddaddy trap very much. They lived in Como till they were old. And we didn't go to Mother Ben or Daddy Bob's very much, but I have a lot more happy memories of going there. It usually was for a big reunion and a bunch of cousins and aunts and everybody would be there.
So I remember when we first started coming down there, one of the mothers, either grandma or granddaddy's mother, was living with them, and she was
That was
in
Mother.
bed.
That was Mother Minner. Uncle Daddy Bob had already died, and Mother
Okay.
Minner. It was after she had begun to get older, and when Daddy Bob first died, one of her sisters lived with her, and they still stayed in the house in between Picton and Pine Forest. The house is still standing, but they kind of got scared living there by themselves. They were both older,
Right.
so I don't remember where Aunt Ella went, but Mother Minner moved. Aunt Lovis got her an apartment there in Sulphur Springs, and she lived there until her health began to get bad.
Okay.
And then she would stay with Aunt Arlo or Aunt Lovis, her mother.
Okay.
And so she
I
kind
know
of,
she was a lot older.
yeah, and she was,
She wasn't around much longer.
no. Mm-mm.
After that. Wow.
Daddy Bob and Mother Minner both died after Wayne and I married. I mean, he knew both of them.
Hmm.
I don't think he ever knew Grandma Trap, but he knew Granddaddy and Grandma Trap. So, no question?
This is
John-
lovely.
I know it. So anything else, like what do you want to be acknowledged for, Patsy? Like your legacy. What do you feel like you are leaving?
I think I've
You
probably
offer-
tried to be a peacemaker, but it was kind of that way with my siblings.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like I was kind of the
Mm-hmm.
peacemaker,
Mhm.
go between,
I see that with your kids too.
yeah. So
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, wow.
What do you want your family to be remembered kind of in the same way? What do you feel like most proud about
that I want my children to remember me.
you, and also just like you and your siblings and just kind of your generation? Like, what would Becky want her, Judy, and Wyatt, my mom, Kathy, to be remembered for? Kind of like, how would you describe the way you guys grew up and what you're most proud of?
Well, I'm proud of all of my kids, all of them, grandkids and great grandkids. I have wonderful in-laws. We tried really hard to bring our children up to love God and Jesus and want to be Christians. Unfortunately, they've not all followed that. That's been one of my saddest things to happen. And they don't, as they would say, they don't see it the way I do. My constant prayer is for them to become Christians. All of them. These little ones that are coming up that they don't have a knowledge of even God right now. Some of them, these little boys here, I was telling little Elliot just coming down here, we were looking at the clouds, and I said, Elliot, do you know who made those clouds? No. And I said, God made those clouds. I don't know if he's going to be attending a VBS this coming week, I think, at a Church of Christ there in Waxahachie with some friends. But, now Kendra and her family go to a Baptist church in McKinney, and all four of her kids are absolutely precious. I mean, they're just good kids. We've had some ups and downs, some things that were not to our liking that have happened in our family, as we all do. Mm-hmm. But overall, my children are absolutely precious. I love them. They're good people, good, wonderful, wonderful. As I said, my one major prayer is that they will all become Christians. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying not what I tell them, but what the Bible tells them. I want them just to want to know what God wants them to do and how God wants them to live.
Well, you've definitely modeled the Christian life.
We've
Patsy,
tried very hard to.
and whether they profess a religion or faith, that they have that example in you. And the way they are with their kids and grandkids is such a reflection of what you and Wayne
Yeah,
did for them.
yeah.
So,
One of my greatest heartaches, well, it's all of our heartaches, but one of the things that really, really bothers me, Rusty is Cheryl's husband. He is one of the sweetest men you'd ever know. He doesn't even believe in God. He had a terrible, terrible storybook size story growing up. So he had no training at all. So he didn't even believe in God. Cheryl, and I don't know what happened. I don't really know. I have some thoughts, but Cheryl is almost, she's kind of more on the fence. To deny God is the worst thing you can do. Absolutely the worst. We're told that that's going to be more punishable than a lot of sins. There's grades of punishment. It's like,
what I see in Cheryl and Rusty, though, is their love for each other.
oh, they have
Their love-
tremendous.
And to me, that is an
And
example.
Rusty, I know that he is a lot closer to me than he was his real mother. He didn't even know when his real mother died for a long time, and a lawyer finally got in touch with him, had a little money left to him, and he didn't even know when she died. He doesn't even know for sure who his daddy is.
Right, right.
So that's kind of tells you a little bit. But
Can you tell me a little bit about?
But he is the absolute. What he told me was, he said, "I believe in living the very best life I can, treating others as much like I want them to treat me, and that's it."
Yeah. Can you tell me about your church growing up? Who the pastor was? Who?
Well, we lived in a little small town, so we didn't always have a regular preacher.
Okay.
We had men that were elders, and they would teach, and we'd have songs and prayers and communion. Always had communion, and they would take turns sometimes preaching, or not preaching but teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And periodically, my Uncle George would come to Brashear and preach for us. And then in the summertime, we'd
That
have
was your dad's half brother.
yeah. And he would also teach. He was a good song leader and singer, and he would teach us new songs.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the summertime, we'd have what we called a meeting, a summer meeting. Might last 2 weeks, usually did. And we'd have a preacher, maybe a well-known preacher at the time, come, and they would live with one of the families. And a lot of times they stayed with us. So I have a lot of really good memories of good preachers spending a week or two with us, and hearing him and Mother and Daddy sit around at night and talk and discuss the Bible, and those are very good memories. And that's the way.
How far away was the church from you?
Oh, a couple miles.
Okay, so pretty easy.
It was
to
in
get to.
Brashear.
Okay.
Yeah,
How big was it? Can you describe the church?
15 or 20. I don't know.
15 or 20?
Yeah, it was a small town. I mean,
Yeah.
there was a Baptist church and a Methodist church. I know. I don't know if there's any others or not. But, I mean, the whole town. One time when we were visiting Ivan and Mary Lou and Wayne and I were visiting my sister in Mississippi. We sat one day, we got talking, and we started naming all the people we could remember that lived in Brashear. And it wasn't that many people.
You think you got them all?
Pretty much. Every
Pretty
once in a
much.
while, I'll think of someone. I think, did we put them on that list? I still got the list.
Wow.
And a lot of them had funny nicknames. And Mary Lou, Ivan's wife, just gets so tickled at some of the nicknames of the people that we knew. And I think we even named some of those. But
What was the building like? The church that?
well, the little town, you just drove right on Highway 67. And when I was real young, we had a blacksmith, we had a general store, we had the post office, we had, I know, at least 3 churches, service station. So it was a little bigger. And right in the center of town was this big open area, and the Church of Christ sat right there. And then there was another little church that was there on that same open area. The other two churches were another area. And there was a gin kind of back behind where the church was that burned one time, which was a real bad. Yeah, and then it just began to get smaller and smaller. I had a little friend there that lived in Brashear. I didn't go to school. Now Wayne started school in Brashear, but after a certain period of time, it got so small that they consolidated. They could choose to either go to Sulphur Springs, which was 10 miles away, or to Cumbie, which was 4 miles away. And Wayne and his brothers, there was Wayne and Glenn and Billy and RT. There was 4 of them that were still in school, and they went to Cumbie. And that's when Wayne and I met. We went to school together. And
High
all
school
4 of
together.
those boys married girls that went to school there.
Oh, wow.
So,
This is high school?
well, yeah, I guess Wayne, I guess he just went through high school there. Of course, I went to that same school all my life. So.
How long were you two married?
We were married 57 years when he died.
Wow.
When we married, I mean, Wayne graduated a year ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I graduated, we got married right after that. We graduated, and Wayne and I married in August. And Daddy had to sign for me to marry because I was 17. No, wait a minute. Must have been just 16. I had to be older than that. But I was fixing to be 17, and then Wayne was going to be 19 pretty soon after that. So I know Daddy had to decide for us to get married,
Wow.
which was young.
Right.
But we didn't have our first baby until 5 years later.
Okay.
I found a job and worked until we bought a house. And Vicky bought the house in May, and she was born in July.
Wow.
Yeah. And we lived in that house until Wayne died.
That same house.
Yeah. We bought it in 1953, and he died in 2005.
Wow.
So how many years would that have been?
Oh gosh, making me do math. 52.
And then we'd already been married 5 years before Vicky was born.
Right.
So I mean, it may have been more than 57 years. Anyway.
Oh, that's great.
I probably think of, especially because they're there with me every Friday, and a lot of times and maybe the 2 granddaughters. So when I think of things that I don't think I've told them, I just relate it to them because these are things that I'd like for them to remember.
Right. It's so
In fact,
meaningful for us because
Larry's wife, Laura,
Uh-huh.
is the most sentimental person you've ever seen in your life, and she really wanted me to do just exactly what we're doing right now, or to either write it down. Well, in fact, have you ever heard of this Storyworth?
No.
One year she gave me, she said, Nanny, every Monday, and this is what it amounts to, every Monday she would send me a text. Nanny, what was your earliest memories? And I would now this started on my birthday, in September 5th. She would ask me a question, and I had a week to answer that on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next Monday, she would ask me another question, and just like you've been doing. And that went on for a year. And I have a book of that. They put it in a book, and it's called Storyworth.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I could have even added pictures to it, but at the time I wasn't that good at my phone, and I would have had to dig through a lot of pictures to try to, and I didn't know just how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't. The front of the book has a picture of Elliot and another little cousin his age with me, and but I didn't put any pictures in it. Now they told me I could go back and do that, but I don't know if I will. I had termites get into my closet several years ago, and I had boxes of pictures and framed pictures up there all on that shelf. Termites destroyed all of that
No.
before we even knew they were up there. I just can't even think about it because
Yeah.
too many memories there that are gone.
Yeah. So they went through all the pictures, not just the frames. They got
Yeah, they just, yeah,
chewed through everything.
boxes of pictures.
Oh man, it's devastating.
Heartbreaking, heartbreaking. Because I've always said that if I had a fire or a tornado, or if I had to try to save anything in my house, it would be my pictures.
Yeah. Did they get all of them, or?
Well, no, I still have a lot of pictures, but the ones they got were snapshots. And I've got albums of pictures, but those are mostly older some of them when the children were little, but a lot of them were vacation pictures. The book pictures they got were just snapshots and photos of at random. And I had a lot of pictures of Wayne and I that we had some friends every time we get together with this one set of friends, which was fairly often get-togethers, this couple would make pictures of couples and then give them to us. And I had a bunch of pictures, really cute pictures of Wayne and I, they'd made of us that the kids don't have. There's no copies and things like that. And I had started several years ago thinking I'm going to go through and pick out some pictures that they might want to show at my funeral. And I had some really good pictures of us and kind of had them laid aside of kind of different, and those are gone.
Oh no.
So that was really sad.
Oh wow. Oh man, this is lovely. This has been really nice.
Anything else?
Gosh, I mean, I could sit and let this thing roll for 10 years and it'd be amazing. All right, final one. Let's see here.
I know I've started in some stories and get off on something else and probably didn't complete, but
Yeah. Well, we'll have follow-up questions. I'm going to share this video with my family, and I mean, you saw how many stories surprised Becky.
Yeah.
She didn't even know about.
oh yeah. Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm sure we'll have some follow-up stuff for you.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can add to it if we need to later.
Yeah. No, this is great. This is actually a beautiful lighting, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing the clarity of stories that you have. Or
Yeah.
I feel like I'm there experiencing it. In the time that you were saying all the innovations that have happened in your lifetime, what do you feel like was some of the more impactful moments in history that you experienced that you felt like,
Well,
wow, I'm living
it was
history?
a long time after Wayne and I married before we got a television. The first television I ever saw was a couple friends of ours went to church with us, and they had bought this little 12-inch black and white. This was when TV was new, and they had a bunch of couples come over to their house after church so we could all watch TV. And here we are, 10 or 12 couples, I don't know how many, trying to watch this little 12-inch black and white TV. And it just went on from there. And Wayne and I had one of our first things that we bought after we bought this house was a great big stereo unit that had the record player. It was a TV. I loved music. We had lots of good records and of different from one side. We even started out and had old wax record. So it just went from there. I mean, that was some of my, even radio. I mean, I remember the first radio we got, first lights, and then the TV, and of course, I didn't get my first cell phone until after Wayne died.
Yeah.
The kids kept trying to get us to get a cell phone because if we were out somewhere and they couldn't get us. So after Wayne died, I got a cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, I mean, the inventions are so dramatic that I can't even begin to. I mean, you invent one thing and you spring from that to the others. You know how it goes. It's just mushrooms. So.
Even amazing here, you're talking about not the windmill, but it was a wind
charger.
Wind charger. And so when the wind was spinning, it would give you a
create
charge.
Electricity.
And then you could run a light and
have radio.
And that wasn't in your home though. You said that was in the barn or something?
No, it was we had it wired, it was a little hang down with one bulb in the house.
Okay.
But we always had lamps because those didn't work all the time.
Right.
And I remember after we moved to Brashear, uh, we still didn't have a car. We rode the wagon to church, which was a couple of miles for a long time.
And what was the wagon? It was
Just a big old farm wagon
yeah.
pulled by two horses. Some
You just
people used,
tied them up while you were in church and
Yeah.
then
yeah,
rode on home.
yeah.
And all the kids could fit in the back and the
Yeah.
parents would steer in front.
I don't know. I don't remember who this vehicle belonged to. It must have been. I don't think it was Daddy's, but it had a rumble seat in the back, which is kind of like a trunk, except it opens from the top back. And I think we could sit in that rumble seat back there. I remember going somewhere in it. I don't know whose car it was. I'm not even sure. I don't remember which. I don't remember Daddy's first car right offhand. I just don't remember it.
Wow.
But it was. I don't remember when he first got a car.
Yeah.
I remember when we were moving from Pine Forest area to Brashear, and I think it was White was sitting on the fender. I don't know whose car it was. Somebody had to be helping us. White sat on the fender of that car, apparently from Pine Forest to Brashear, which was quite a little drive,
Yeah.
20, 30, 25 miles maybe.
Whoa.
And he helped. They always had one of these little hood ornaments.
Yeah.
He sat on the fender and held onto that.
Hold on to it.
Yeah. Of course, I'm sure they didn't drive real fast, but
Right.
I do remember him. I have that memory, of him sitting on that.
Yeah.
But was it RS or White? I thought it was White. He was 6 years or 6 years. May have been, because that would have been, he'd have been about 10. I don't know. It could have been RS, but I really thought, my memory is it was White.
Mm-hmm. That's wild. Do you remember historical events? Like, you remember a little bit about World War II starting?
I remember when it started, and of course we followed up on it, and I would always hear the news, would lunch, during the summer when we'd come in from the fields. Mother would always have a hot lunch and a hot meal, and Daddy would let us we'd sit around the table and they'd talk. So we usually had about an hour or more break, and then we'd have to go back to the fields. But Mother would always have the Stamps Quartet singing Southern music, Southern gospel, and the news. All of that was usually kind of happening on about the time we'd come in for lunch. But and I remember occasionally we go to the county. Silver Springs was the county seat of Hopkins County, and it seemed like maybe once, like on Saturday, and I don't know that it was every Saturday, but some Saturdays that we'd go to town. I was going to town, and my aunt and uncle had a drugstore there, which was they always let us have ice cream free, and they had a couple of. Well, at one point they had three movies there in Silver Springs. And if we went to a movie, they'd always have these news flashes showing what was going on. And I always hated that because it showed what was going on in the war. And it was just, I just almost closed my eyes rather than watch it because it was just too
much.
Too much, yeah. And I remember RS coming in from overseas, from Africa, and I remember White coming in on furloughs or when he left the service. How happy it all was for him to get home.
Yeah. Do you remember, like, JFK's the assassination?
Yes. Wayne was downtown, right close to where that happened. I remember exactly. I was. This is strange how things happen, but I was ironing, and a friend of mine called me and said, "Patsy, have you got your TV on?" And so I stopped and turned it on, and it was showing all of it at that point. And Wayne had been working down there just real close to where all that happened. He worked for Dallas Power and Light at that time, and he was right in that area, pretty close. Wow. Oh yeah, that was a big thing, and all for ages, and then all of those things on the guy that they said killed him. You know,
Lee
they thought-
Harvey
yes,
Oswald.
Harvey Oswald. And yeah, that was a sad, sad time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my. What do you see happening? Oh gosh. Trying to think of how different your childhood is from the childhoods you're seeing start right now. Like all the stories you just told us about being in the
is
fields at
there
8
is
years
just
old.
absolutely no comparison.
Yeah.
My kids, I think the way I was raised was a very healthy, even though that was very backwards. We were very definitely taught discipline. I mean, we knew we were going to have to go to the fields. We didn't question it, and we had certain chores that we knew it was ours. We had to do. My kids and my grandkids. It was really hard to. I mean, raising my children in a city as opposed to being raised on a farm, they didn't have that many chores that they needed to do, you know. But I think that it definitely taught us discipline and responsibility. And sometimes in the way our children are raised, I don't know that they, especially in today's age, discipline, as you know, is a problem.
Yeah.
Respect for authority. There's overall, I'm not saying my family, I'm just saying in general, respect for authority, respect for parents, or, you know, certainly respect for God. It's just almost non existent.
Yeah.
You know how the schools are going right now. I've had friends that quit teaching school, they just said, couldn't handle it. No discipline. They can't discipline. And Larry's wife, she's had students threaten her. So, you know, it's just, I don't know. The world is in a bad shape right now. Very bad shape overall. I hate to be a black cloud, but it is.
Yeah.
Our world is in a mess.
I will add something that's comforting, I hope. I think a lot of times when we feel like the world's bad and it's tough, I think we look back to your generation and say, wow, that tough time produced some of the toughest people.
It did.
And there is a chance that whatever tough thing is happening to us.
And two things come to kind of like the pendulum swings one way or the other.
Yeah.
It could make a drastic change.
Yep.
I
think we have hope that
yes,
something hard will happen in
God
our,
is still
in our
in
time.
control. God is still in control.
And that we will rise to the occasion like your generation did.
Right. And there is that hope, very definitely. And my prayer, that's in my prayers all the time. For my, yeah. There is
you're part of a generation that we call the greatest generation.
Yeah.
I hope there's some pride knowing that.
Yeah. Well, and there's whole, you know, when 9/11 occurred, look how we rose to how patriotic everybody got. It's a shame that we have to wait on something like that to happen, but we still have that patriotism and that, what is the word? Concern for our country and
for our neighbor.
I pray for unity in our, we're not a united nation anymore, and I pray that that can be corrected. I'm sometimes not sure that we're even considered a Christian nation anymore. We were at one time, and we were a united nation. And I don't know if that will ever reverse or not.
I think you may have been part of the, because historically we haven't always been this united. We had a civil war in the 1800s.
Yeah, right, definitely.
And then when we first came together, we were more states than we were countries.
Yeah.
So the states felt more like your identity. I was a Virginian. I was a New York. I was from Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And it feels like the period that you experienced with World War I, World War II,
Korea,
unifying us, and then us finding our legs in the, on the global sphere. I feel like you might have seen
Yeah.
the most united and the most.
Well, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I know and I love history. I love the study of history, and I know there were really rough times, but I can't even imagine a civil war in our country right now.
Mhm.
But it happened. Yeah. Slavery was a terrible thing. Still, I mean, we're still having backlashes from that, and may always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was a period where World War II was happening, and
Mm-hmm.
man, we came together.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We still have that patriotism,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully we always will.
Yeah.
We're still the greatest nation on earth.
I also love history. I've been reading everything I can about what to expect in the future. And if it's any consolation, anybody that's looking hard, we have all the things behind us. We have the demographics, we have the natural resources, we have the protected borders with oceans on each side, friendly neighbors to the north and the south.
Yeah.
You know, we have the opportunity to be
the potential,
the global superpower for the next 100 years if we don't mess it up ourselves.
I feel that way too.
Yeah.
I sure do.
Well, Patsy, this has been an honor.
I appreciate you doing this for me. I mean, my kids have wanted something like this for a long time, and it just hadn't come about. And I know there are things that like I said, I deviate from. One thing makes me think of something else, and I know some of the questions I haven't answered completely, but I know I've told you a lot of things that I know my kids would like to see this.
I'll make this available.
That would be fabulous.
This will be available for everybody.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah. Well, thank you much. All right, I'm going to turn this off. This lighting was perfect.
This is not necessarily to be recorded. We were on a trip one time we had a couple that Wayne and I, this is my history. Wayne and I traveled with this one couple for years. They started off with a little truck with a camper, what do they call them? Where they had the camper on the truck.
The camper shell?
Well, it was actually went up over the hood, and there was a bed up over the hood. That was when they always wanted us to go with them on vacation. And she loved to plan the trips, and that was fine with us. And, but they always wanted us. Now, sometimes after they got bigger vehicles, we'd have three couples. But anyway, there was this one couple that we always traveled with, and I started to tell you something, and it went from my mind. It started in the background. Let me think a minute. What did you just ask me?
No, I was just thinking, but you said you had a story that came to you about traveling with a couple that.
Yeah, I did. And what? Jared, I can't remember right now. I'd probably think of it later.
Right.
And I hope you're not recording right now, but I was just trying to think of, it was a funny. We went all over the United States with that couple.
Yeah.
And we also went into Canada, Alaska. Never did go overseas, but went to Prince Edward Island. I mean, we did a lot of traveling. We saw country that we would have never seen had it not been for this couple.
Yeah.
And he started off with a small trailer, a camper, and then he got a big one, and he finally got one of those great old big long ones, which was, just fancy. Mm-hmm. And we drove.
It was one that you tow behind?
No, we never did get that kind, but it was a big long, like a bus, sort of, but bigger.
But you drive the.
But he drive it, yeah.
Okay.
And we traveled with them until they were both older than Wayne and I. She was about 10 years older than me, and her husband was about 10 or 12 years older than her. But we went to church together. We were real good friends. We did things together, and they just always wanted Wayne and I to go with them. And they were both kind of short, not so much short-tempered, quick to snap back. And sometimes they'd get to bickering back and forth, and Wayne and I were kind of the peacemakers, Oh, I know what I was going to say. We traveled with them until his mind began to get bad. He began to have dementia, and the last trip we took, we said, this is it. Because, you could just see things
that he was doing, and we thought it's not safe anymore. And he did go on and really get bad with dementia.
Oh no.
But we had made a lot of beautiful trips with him. Saw the world that we would have not seen just on our own.
Right. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And then one time, Ivan and Mary Lou and Wayne and I, on our 50th anniversary, we were gone 4 or 5 weeks. We met in Tulsa, where they had Ivan's had a daughter-in-law there and a granddaughter, and we met there, and then went to Memphis and went all up the East Coast and into Canada, and then went around into Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and then back over and then back down the East Coast. I think we were gone 4 or 5 weeks.
Wow.
I don't remember for sure, but I know it was a long time. And you talk about seeing a lot.
Yeah.
And then we went up the West Coast. Well, we just did a lot of really neat traveling, which I wouldn't take anything wrong for that. Lots and lots of good memories.
And you and Ivan stayed close over the years.
Yeah, Ivan and Mary Lou kind of planned that trip for us, and it was wonderful. We had the best time on that trip. It was really great. The one disappointing thing was when we were in, and again, I love history, so in the Boston area, and in that area where there's so much history, it was rainy. They had a lot of walking trails and, things that you could do, and it was rainy.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of things that we did go to Salem, and we saw wherever they had the witch.
Right.
That was Salem. We went to Plymouth.
Mm-hmm.
Went on the ship, like one of the ships that Columbus came over.
The Pilgrim.
We saw cranberries being harvested. We did a lot. We went to cheese factory. We did a lot of things. Syrup, where they got the maple syrup, and did a lot of things on that West Coast trip with.
Yeah.
Some of that was done with friends, but some of it was done with Ivan and Mary Lou.
That's great. What a fun continuation.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let Becky ask you.
It'll be fun to see how this turns out.
I know. What fun.
I'm not photogenic. I don't like
Yes, you are.
pictures of me.
Stop that. You are. We were just saying how good you look for 95. It's like amazing.
You what?
I said I can't get over how good you look for your age.
Becky, I get comments all the time. I never, anytime someone asks my age or something, even doctors, they'll say, "You can't be."
I said, "Where are your wrinkles for 95?"
I got a black pharmacist, and he first time when I first went in there,
Yeah.
he was giving me a shot, and it was back when we were wearing a mask. So later I was in there, and he saw me walk by, and he just pulled his mask down, telling me, pull my mask down. That was like a year later. He wanted to see if I had any wrinkles. But I have people all the time, and I am so blessed. I thank God every time I pray for my health and my long life. But
I know.
Constantly, and it's just such a blessing.
Right.
And I don't deserve it. So God has just been good to me.
Yeah.
But,
well, cool.
I went to a heart specialist one time, and the nurse, she walked out I'd never seen her before. She had my chart. She walked out and called my name, and she says, "There's no way you're 93 years old." That was a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Well, neat. Cool.
And I could drop dead in the next minute, and I know that. I know that my time is limited, but I don't worry about that. I know that I'm nearly 95, and Fran a year older. But I still, like my friend, I told you maybe I didn't tell you. I was talking to one of my real good friends. It's a couple, Larry Marshall, and he's a retired minister. And he's a cut up. Larry and Gary your kid, y'all would love him. He just jokes all the time. So I was talking to him on the phone one day, and I said, Larry, and I don't know what brought it up. And I said, Larry, one of the things that I pray for all the time is that God will allow me to keep my sanity as long as I live. And he said, well, Patsy, you better hurry if you're going to lose it. You haven't got that much more time. And he and one of our retired elders are going to do my funeral. And I tell them both now, y'all take good care of yourselves because you're going to do my funeral. And I kid them all the time now. You don't get sick.
I know. Okay. Well, that's me, Patsy.
Oh, man.